This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
I think we're having some technical difficulties right now. It looks like Dr. Moody is frozen. Tom, can you still hear me? Okay, good. Um, well, let me try and figure out what he would like us to do. I'm so sorry about this. Oh, he's going to join us in just a second. How are you doing today, Tom?
Well, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Can't complain. Can't complain. Excited to hear what you guys have to say about these headlines. It seems like the past couple days have just been uh, overwhelming with religious news headlines.
And maybe that is why Dwight has broken from tradition and gone from 5 news stories to 6. Is there any precedent for that?
Yeah, he's done it a couple times, when there's something extra juicy going on, for lack of a better word. Um,
Well, apparently that's the case this week.
yeah, it's been kind of crazy here in the U.S. considering the various holidays we've got coming up, and then our Supreme Court decisions that are or hearings, I guess it's called right now, isn't it?
Yes, and they aren't decisions obviously, but all the experts are analyzing like what's implied in that question, and they're making predictions based on the direction of what the justices are saying during these hearings. There's so
Wow.
much public attention, though, especially on the abortion case, but not only on that case. There's also a lot of issues relating to religion that are on the docket this time.
Is there one in particular that you are keeping an eye on?
The abortion one, like so many other people, also what's allowed with respect to public funding going to religious schools.
Mm. Yeah, they've been talking about that a bit here in Kentucky, as far as like how to, I think it's a voucher system, maybe.
Sure.
Uh, I say that I forget that we're all not in Kentucky sometimes on this show. We've got quite the spread of guests. Dwight just let me know that his laptop crashed, so let me see if he can get it back going. But what made me interested when you were talking about them trying to decipher the questions, I wonder how our connectedness, our ability to be able to hear and see what's actually going on, well, not see but hear what's going on in the court, changes how they do things versus when they first started.
That's a really good point. And what it brings to mind for me is the concern on the part of the Chief Justice, Roberts,
Mm.
about the court being seen as just another political entity, his concern about the court losing credibility, losing public standing.
That kind of I feel like that's such a line for him to give, especially considering that he is more conservative and more leans towards the states' rights having more precedent. It's been wild to watch how they dodge and weave and paint these stories, because it feels like, as Americans, we've got the judicial system and these pillars that keep us going as a country, that hold us up, right? And he's really, in that sense, calling that all of that structure into question when he says things like that.
Well, one institution after another has fallen into public distrust
Mm.
over the decades. And so it's understandable why Roberts would be concerned. And he's the top person at the court. So that's another reason why he might be especially concerned about the public standing and credibility of that institution. It's probably his temperament too. According to the reports I read about yesterday, he was trying to carve out some space for a compromise around that Mississippi case in Roe v. Wade. There were no takers, apparently.
Oof. Yeah, I mean, I feel like abortion is has been such a, top five issue, so to speak, in America for so long. I wonder if we're ever going to get to a place or get to some kind of settlement on it with our, being a country founded on Christianity and what that implies for our judicial system.
I think there could be, there's a pretty obvious solution to this impasse, but nobody wants to go for it. Neither side wants to give up certain things. I've been writing about that for years.
Mm.
But we might get into this with Dwight, but in certain ways, both sides of the political argument have benefited from the stalemated status quo.
Mm.
And if indeed that's about to change, there could be some really huge political swings and ramifications and huge political drama. We shall see.
Right.
So, what are we hearing about Dwight and the fate of his computer and ability to join this fascinating conversation?
He has yet to respond to me. So, what today? We are actually not live on the radio. Oh, here he is. Can you hear us, Dr. Moody? We have the benefit of not being live on the radio today, so if you guys will bear with us while we vamp for about 20 seconds. All right. Can you hear us now?
I can hear you loud and clear. I apologize.
Too bad Dr. Moody is back. The two of us were having such a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure you could carry on just fine without me, Tom and Alex. I don't know what happened, but my computer crashed and took everything with it. So it's good to be back. And I welcome everybody, and Tom especially, Tom Krattenmaker, the Director of Public Relations for Yale Divinity School in New Haven, Connecticut, my longtime friend and occasional partner here in the Meetinghouse. Welcome back to the Meetinghouse, Tom.
Thanks, Dwight, or Dr. Moody. Looking forward to breaking down the news with you again, and I know you have a lot of it.
Well, it's been a wonderful week of stories and the stuff going on just every day. I have 6 stories today.
This time, so obviously it is a big news week.
It is.
Normally
a big
you
news
have 5.
And several of these stories we could spend the whole time talking about. The news, of course, is always brought to us by my friends out in California, PerfectoCoffeeInc.com. I hope some of you sometime will order your coffee from Perfecto Coffee. I send a package of it to all of my guests. I'm going to send a package to Tom because I know he's a coffee drinker. I'm not much of a coffee drinker, but I do send this good coffee. And we want to thank the people of Perfecto Coffee for their interest in the Meetinghouse, for their support of the Meetinghouse, and for the coffee that they make and send all over the country. Let's take a listen to their advertising of Perfecto Coffee. I love that little jingle, and I love that short little video, but we're going to start not in the United States, but in Paris, France, because this is a global story. The French state and religious authorities have released information about the renovation of the Notre Dame Cathedral. It's 850 years old and has become one of the most iconic and influential structures in global Christianity. You will remember that 2 years ago, in the spring of 2019, it suffered a devastating fire that they determined later was accidental. Designs are calling for the modernization of lighting and seating and the use of modern technology to present and interpret the religious art throughout the building. A spokesperson for the foundation, which is directing and funding the operation, said that the intent is, quote, to make the cathedral and Christianity accessible to those not raised in a Christian society. Critics, though, have called the project a woke theme park, influenced more by Disney than the church. Though owned by the state, that is, by the government of France since the Revolution, the cathedral annually hosts 2,400 masses. It is a structure of the Roman Catholic Church, and 150 concerts. It is a major tourist attraction and is scheduled to be ready in some sense for the 2024 Summer Olympics. Tom, have you ever been to France and seen the Notre Dame Cathedral?
Yes, I have, and I was going to ask you exactly the same question.
No,
I was there many, many years ago, and it was a memorable experience. I was very impressed by it, and it's really stuck in my memory. What about you?
No, I have not been to France, period, or to Paris, or to the cathedral. It is on my to-do list, and maybe we should get up a tour group, Tom, and after it's renovated, and take a group of people over there.
Yeah, and as part of that, we should definitely go to Normandy, the site of the D-Day landing. But that's a whole other story, a very
Yes,
solemn one.
it's a very solemn one, and I'm interested. I want to say that I read about this through an article posted on the website called getreligion.com. And this is a website that was launched and hosted by conservative religious people whom I know and communicate with, who are frustrated in the way that the secular media especially treats religion in public life and ignores so many stories. And so they picked up this story about the renovation and wrote a strong critique of it. And using this phrase that they're using Disney-like approaches to the renovation. I doubt that is, I'm sure that's not the whole story, but why wouldn't we use modern technology?
That was my thought exactly, Dwight.
It's going to have to be. You know, the old places. I remember when our congregation, our sanctuary in Owensboro, Kentucky, where I was the pastor for 6 years, was crushed by a tornado. It picked up the bell tower and flung it right through the ceiling of the sanctuary. Well, in the renovation, they put in new modern lighting, new modern sound systems, as well as restoring all of the original woodwork and redoing all the pews. So it was a mixture of the old and the new. Surely that's what they need to do at Notre Dame, don't you think?
I agree. It doesn't bother me at all if they're doing some things with the tech and the lighting and these other factors to try to make the cathedral and Christianity more accessible to those who are not steeped in the religion.
I think
And I love the idea of a wider swath of people visiting the cathedral, and having that experience and being moved by it. And did they say it was going to be a woke
that's the
theme park?
word.
Don't get me started on the way so many people use woke in a
I know.
negative way right now as a way
You
to
know,
demean things.
yes, as a way to demean it. I'm sure the renovations have nothing to do with woke culture in the United States, but it's just a way of tagging it in a negative way. But
Exactly.
I love the idea of trying to present the Christian message and the Christian heritage of France and of the whole world in a fresh and creative and inventive and technologically sophisticated way. I wish we could do that in all the churches.
Yeah, and it's surprising that people in America who are concerned about religion would say this about Notre Dame. I mean, one of the things that's been great about American religion and part of its success has been its entrepreneurial spirit and its willingness to innovate and use technology and all of these things. And so it seems like a very misguided critique.
I think
I
it's a
mean,
very
maybe when
misguided.
we see it, we think, oh, that is over the top. That is too Disney. I
Oh, we'll
kind of
say
doubt it. We should remain, I guess, a little bit skeptical, but come on.
You know, I've read a bunch of articles on it in preparing for this, and although they hope some of it will be ready in time for the Summer Olympics in 2024, they really anticipate that the complete reconstruction will take a decade or two. to rebuild. They have
That long, wow.
They have cut down 1,000 oak trees from forests all around France to provide the wood to rebuild the roof and other parts of it. And I dare say it's something that French people, religious and not, are going to be very proud of. And people all over the world are going to flock to Notre Dame over the next decade to see it, I suspect.
Well, I hope that project goes well. It's a beautiful cathedral.
It is. And maybe you and I can get over there and take some people with us.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, the next story is from New York City, a great place where I've been many times. And of course, you've been many times. Popular and honored journalist Jonathan Merritt preached a sermon on Sunday, November the 11th at the Good Shepherd Church of New York City, where he is a member and serves as a lay elder. This would not have been newsworthy, although it is a stellar sermon, and I recommend it. I encourage everybody to go watch it. And it's in a gorgeous building, an old building, a very traditional building, a wonderful service of worship with excellent musicians. But his proud father, a longtime friend of mine, Dr. James Merritt of Atlanta, Georgia, tweaked a link to it and encouraged people to listen. The problem is Dr. Merritt, the senior, a leading megachurch pastor in the Southern Baptist Convention, and Merritt, the junior, not so evangelical as his dad and out of the closet since 9 years ago. The tweet from the elder Merritt stirred up quite the buzz with leaders of the conservative side of the Southern Baptist Convention, called the Conservative Baptist Network. They've launched and reinvigorated their attack on the Southern Baptist establishment, which includes, in this sense, James Merritt. James Merritt had to resign as an adjunct faculty member from a Southern Baptist seminary here in North Carolina. This is a terrible story. I hate to report it. Dr. Merritt, the senior, is a longtime friend of mine. He was my guest in the Meetinghouse back in May. Yes, he is a conservative preacher, two-time president of the Southern Baptist Convention, but he's got a son that has found his own voice, gone his own way, and achieved remarkable success in journalism. You know young Jonathan Merritt, don't you?
Yeah, I'm like you. I'm really, really bothered by these attacks against Dr. Merritt, the elder Merritt. It's crazy. They're behaving as though he murdered someone or
Yes.
committed some horrible, horrible sin. As you pointed out, Dwight, I do know Jonathan Merritt and consider him a friend, and I think the world of him. He's a really, really, really good person, an excellent journalist and preacher, extremely well informed theologically, very responsible guy. I'm proud to know him. He and I have even co-presented together at a conference one time. And he's a key figure in my 2013 book, The Evangelicals You Don't Know. I did not know about this incident with his father's tweet. And hello, a father tweeting with pride about his son. As you pointed out to me, Dwight, the sermon had nothing to do with homosexuality. He's just saying that I'm proud of my son and the sermon. And for him to be attacked that way.
It's terrible.
And, apparently, the elder Merritt had to resign his adjunct faculty position.
Yeah. Yes.
This is also crazy.
It is crazy. I listened to the whole sermon. It is a terrific sermon. I posted it on my Facebook page and commented about it and encouraged all of my network to watch the sermon. I wish I could preach a sermon like that. I wish I could write a sermon like that. It is such a wonderful text and wonderful sermon about Christianity and about how Christ is always coming again into the chaos of our worlds as they collapse. It is a terrific sermon. And for the conservatives, of course, they're just using it to further their agenda. As you know, I attended the Southern Baptist Convention. this last summer. As a journalist, it was my first time to get media credentials. And a lot of it was new to me, but it was a pretty dramatic meeting. The man who leads this campaign against Dr. Merritt was a candidate for the presidency of the SBC and got beat by a relatively secondary figure, a man down in Mobile, Alabama, whose ministry is racial reconciliation, that he has not been involved in all this culture war stuff, but he is involved in building bridges between the white evangelical community and the black evangelical community. And he got elected. Dr. Litton, Ed Litton, I met him and talked with him. He's a good man. I'd like to have him on in the Meetinghouse. I told him that. But these people are trying to stir up trouble in the Southern Baptist Convention, and they're using this little event in New York City of Jonathan Merritt preaching this sermon and his dad commending his own son as a preacher of the gospel in a terrible way. And it is the ugliest of ugliness in the Southern Baptist Convention. I resent it. I wrote Dr. Merritt last night and assured him of my support, and he wrote back immediately. It's terrible. This is the kind of thing that makes many of us want to say, well, if that's what it means to be a Christian, count me out.
Well, exactly. Because as you pointed out, it's very, very ugly behavior, and supposedly by these men of God.
Yes, it is
and
a terrible thing.
It's hard to script a bigger turnoff.
I know, but it makes me want to go to church in New York City at the Good Shepherd Church. That's what it made me want to do.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, my next story is in Dallas, Texas. The founder and president of Daystar Television Network, the second largest Christian broadcasting network in the country, has died of COVID. He was 64 years old. Marcus D. Lamb had campaigned against the vaccine on air consistently. But when the virus hit home, infecting both himself and his wife, Joni, he was not strong enough to survive. Lamb used his Pentecostal faith and roots to grow his network, focused on the immediacy of God's action in our lives. He emphasized religious freedom against government action and was a member of the former President Trump's inner circle of spiritual advisors. Lamb and his broadcasting business received a $3.9 million PPP loan from the government, but had to return it when news broke just weeks later that he had purchased a private jet just after receiving the loan.
Dwight, there are so many stories out there about big anti-vaccine campaigners succumbing to the virus.
Yes.
And, that's a big element in my most recent piece, which largely revolves around a minister and radio guy who I used to know and who once had me on his show, and who I regarded as kind of a free-thinking, kindred spirit, who in recent years went down various conspiracy rabbit holes, including COVID conspiracy rabbit holes, and then contracted the virus and died. So I want to ask you something that this story brings up. What is a discerning and compassionate way for us to relate to these stories about anti-vax campaigners who end up contracting the virus and dying? I mean, obviously, it's not a time to gloat, but what is a good way to relate to these kinds of stories?
I don't know the answer to that. You can't gloat. In fact, I'm not even sure this would have been a story in the national news had he not been an anti-vax campaigner. Had he just been the CEO of a television network, this would not have made the news. But the fact that he had spent so much time debunking the vaccine, which technically may or may not have saved him, because sometimes people with the vaccine do catch the virus and succumb to it. But I don't know how to answer it. Certainly with sympathy, I'm
And
just
sympathy for the
sad
family.
that anybody dies now from this thing. But there are people all over who refuse to take the vaccine, and they are endangering themselves. They are endangering everybody. I can tell you how it troubles me as a pastor in this way. I have people in my small congregation who don't want to get vaccinated, who have not gotten vaccinated. And yet we have a protocol in our congregation, a small church down here in Hendersonville, North Carolina, that we want people who come in our sanctuary to be vaccinated. But it's created a pastoral dilemma for me, and I'm sure many others. We don't want to treat the unvaccinated as modern lepers.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
That you can't touch, you can't minister to, you can't be with, that you can't worship with. It is a very much a dilemma. How to promote public health and safety in your congregation, and for the people in your congregation who are really at risk, how to protect them and support public health protocols, while at the same time keeping your pastoral arms around people and touching them with the grace and mercy and love of the Lord. This is a real pastoral dilemma, and I know you have a journalistic dilemma on it.
It's clear to me that it's not a time to gloat, and there shouldn't be any like finger wagging or I told you so. Should never seem like it's something we celebrate. And we have to keep in mind the grieving family.
Yes.
What are they going through? And there's a pretty good chance with anybody like this figure that they have family members who were not anti-vax campaigners. And it's probably an incredibly painful thing for them. And so I think the way to be is compassionate, but at the same time, not excusing the behavior. It's especially tough when somebody uses their platform to try to persuade others to, I will say, be irresponsible about the vaccination.
I agree with this. And this, of course, is what he has done. He has influenced millions of people on this issue. And I grieve for him and his family and his whole business network, thousands of people. But it's just a little part of the much larger polarization of the country. And
Right.
it's very difficult to know how to build bridges with people who are on the other side of this divide. And speaking of divides, oh my.
Yes.
My next story from Washington, D.C. and the Supreme Court. They heard arguments yesterday in the most anticipated court case in years. The issue is abortion. And although abortion is no longer at the top of the issues that are important to religious voters, it still holds potential to generate a seismic shift in American medical and legal norms. The case comes out of Mississippi, as we all know, where the state has enacted a ban on all abortions after the 15th week of pregnancy. This is a direct challenge to current law, which allows for abortions anytime prior to viability, which generally is considered about 24 weeks. The new conservative slant of the Supreme Court, with 3 Trump appointees, makes the overturning of Roe v. Wade possible, even probable. We won't know, of course, until next spring. It will be in the news until then, and after then, you and I both are going to be writing about it. Did you listen to any of the Supreme Court audio recording yesterday?
No, I've relied on print accounts, as is my custom. It's amazing to think about this moment that we're at, Dwight. This abortion issue and Roe v. Wade have been like at the center of culture wars for half a century.
Yeah.
Almost half a century. And now we're on the cusp of what you described as a seismic change. And that's really not an exaggeration. It looks more and more like the vision of a post-Roe world is going to be realized. It's going to go from theory to something very concrete. As I wrote in a piece a few months ago, I think that some anti-abortion crusaders might end up, well, how did I put it in the piece? They may, quote, rue the
Yeah.
end of Roe.
Yes, that's very, very clever. I agree
And
with
we're talking
you.
about a backlash, and we're talking about all sorts of Pandora's boxes being opened up with respect to ever more extremist and alienating legislation that some people will feel that they have to pursue now, since the legal hurdles are cleared out of the way.
Well, there's so many bad things about this situation. One of them is, of course, as you say, if the court rules next June to overturn Roe v. Wade or allow this law in Mississippi to stand and the law in Texas, which prevents abortions after 5 weeks,
Yeah.
it won't be just a matter of a few weeks before other states completely outlaw abortion. And this is going to generate a tidal wave of political reaction that will influence the voting in the fall of 2022. And
Yes, I think that's right.
it's going
And
to it's going to shake things up. But to me, the two most difficult things about this, and I want to articulate these as best I can. If these new 6 conservative judges overturn Roe v. Wade, it demonstrates that the court is not above politics, that it is just a small legislature, and all you have to do to change the law in America is vote on the presidential election and get 5 votes on the Supreme Court. Historically, the will of people at the ballot box has been expressed in the legislature where they pass laws, and the court has been above that. But now, clearly, the politicalization of the Supreme Court, as I think Sotomayor said yesterday in court, is going to tank the reputation of the court and make them all political hacks. You know, Amy Coney Barrett gave this speech in Kentucky back this fall saying, we are not just a bunch of political hacks. But if she leads the way to overturn Roe v. Wade, she will be a political hack. And
yeah, it sure
yes. Now,
it sure looks that way. And
I
there are a
agree
couple
with that.
striking things about this situation. As you alluded to, this focus on abortion on the part of certain political actors is out of sync with where the American public
Yeah.
is, broadly
Yeah.
speaking.
Yes.
And in a similar vein, the idea of virtually banning or maybe completely banning abortion is very much out of sync with where Americans are in terms
Right.
of opinion polling, what Americans want and what they find sensible and reasonable. And so it's power politics playing out on a very big stage and in an alarming way. It's interesting. When I was reading the accounts of yesterday's hearings, there was mention of Chief Justice Roberts, who's very concerned about the institutional well-being and credibility and standing of the court, was clearly trying to stake out some ground where there could be a compromise. There were no takers, apparently.
No takers.
And so the Supreme Court is going through something that's happened to so many institutions in the United States. It's becoming politicized, and it's also falling into distrust. One after another, some of the major institutions, maybe most of the major institutions in our culture, and you can start ticking them off: higher ed, the church, religion,
Yes.
politics, all
Yes.
falling into distrust and
Yes.
discredit.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court is going through that process too. And then everything is just about politics and power. And that appears to be the direction that we see with the Supreme Court. And we haven't even talked about abortion right now and the very, very real and painful impact this is going to have on so many Americans if it's banned. That's a whole other conversation
That's a
coming out
whole
of
other
this.
conversation, because I think what will happen in a place like Mississippi and Texas, if the Supreme Court gives them permission to restrict or eliminate abortions, What I think they will do is pass laws to criminalize crossing a state line to get an abortion. And so
I
they
see.
will try to prevent their residents leaving Mississippi to go to Indiana or Illinois to get an abortion, and Texans from going to Colorado. They will criminalize that, and like the old slave posses, tracking down people who are leaving the state
I
in order
see.
to do something. But the
It's very
wider
serious.
issue, there's a couple of wider issues here that I do want to mention. The conservatives in America have lost almost every cultural battle over the last 50 years, beginning with integration all the way up to gay marriage. They've lost every single battle because the American people, including many, many Christian people, including myself, have moved in a more progressive, open, and liberal direction. In response, the conservative movement has looked to the courts to do what they could not do at the legislature, at the ballot box, in public opinion, at the university, at the cinema. They can't use any of these other vehicles for getting their way, which is the way of the minority, as you pointed out. And they've turned to the courts and the Supreme Court in a last-ditch effort to put a stop to the direction that the country is going. And of course, it's going to fail. As you pointed out, 2/3 of the American people support abortion. 1/3 do not. And they're trying to use 6 people on the Supreme Court, where they do have a majority now, to override the momentum and the movement of the vast majority of the American people. And regardless of what the Supreme Court says, it's all going to fail. The Supreme
Fail in
Court,
what sense, Dwight?
it's going to fail. And because the Supreme Court is going to fail in their ability to stamp out abortion, it's going to erode our trust in the courts, as you've just said.
I'm really interested in what you're saying about how it's going to fail. Could you elaborate on that? It's going to fail in what sense? Do you mean legislatively there will be protections?
Well, I guess what I mean is not just on the issue of abortion, but in the whole range of issues in the culture wars about saying the Lord's Prayer in public schools and reading the Bible in public schools, which they outlawed in 1963, or integration itself, or what we do with gender and transgender, all of this and public. The American public has just moved in a more open and accepting position on all of these things. I have myself as well.
Well,
And
I think you're right.
and the court cannot stop this. I don't care what the Supreme Court says. They can't stop
Right.
this
And
movement.
when you have inexorable and like morally correct, morally just social movements, ultimately no amount of politics
Yes.
or legal wrangling or legal manipulation can stop what is inexorable and just and right.
I agree with this. I
But it
agree
can
with
be a
this.
very painful process before we get to that just place. And lots of years can be lost, and lots of people can suffer the consequences of the political kind of wrangling. But it's a very optimistic vision. And I'm on a good day, I share it that the arc ultimately is bending towards what is just. And
Yes,
it's a
but
way of coping with the things that progressives see in the news today that can be so upsetting and alarming.
yes, but even if you set aside the issue of justice,
Yeah.
a part of this dynamic is the coloring of the American population, the internationalization of the American population,
Hmm.
the rise of Native American stories, Black stories, Latino stories, in the telling of the American story. You know, in New York City, just last week, they took down the statue of Thomas Jefferson out of City Hall because he was a slaveholder. That would have been hard to imagine just 5 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
But this movement toward the globalization of the United States and the pluralization of our population, ethnically, religiously, ideologically, politically, this is the movement that cannot be stopped. This is part of the movement that the conservatives are trying to stop. And the issue of abortion is just one little piece of this broader issue. And, a guest that I had in the Meetinghouse a year ago, Robert P. Jones, who wrote the book, The End of White Christian America, summarizes what I'm talking about as much as anything. Not all of the rulings of the Supreme Court can stop this movement toward the end of white Christian America. That's my point.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And that is a very good and important book, which I also read and which I strongly endorse, as well as his follow-up book, White No Longer.
Oh my gosh, the White No Longer. I mean, both of those books were just powerful in my life, and I hope to have Dr. Jones in the Meetinghouse again shortly. Well, we'll be talking more about abortion. I've got two more stories we need to cover here. From Indianapolis, the Lilly Endowment awarded grants ranging from $500,000 to $1 million to 84 seminaries and theological schools and organizations across our country and Canada under a program entitled Pathways for Tomorrow. This is the second phase in this program. The first, they provided $50,000 planning grants to 234 schools earlier this year. The third phase, which will be announced next year, will provide even larger grants to collaborative projects among these schools. All of these grants are directed toward assisting these schools to better prepare leadership for Christian congregations in this period of rapid social change and struggle. Those receiving these grants cover the wide spectrum of Christian traditions in the United States and Canada, including Protestant, Catholic, liberal, and conservative, including, I might add, a Southern Baptist school. The endowment was established in 1937 by the Eli Lilly family of the pharmaceutical company in Indianapolis. It grants money to nonprofit entities in three divisions: religion, education, and community development. One of the first things I noted when I read through this list, Tom, of these 84 schools is the absence of a very famous school.
But that very famous school that I think you're alluding to has a Lilly grant under a very similar program, which we can talk about.
Well,
but
I did note that Yale was not on this list. Now they may be involved in a.
Yeah, we're on another list that's very similar, and we're very grateful to Lilly for that support and what it's allowing us to do with churches in our area.
Well,
but that is a fascinating and important story, Dwight, and I'm glad you included it in the half dozen stories this week. That's some really good work that Lilly is doing, and it's going to enable seminaries and divinity schools to do some good work. I think big picture, what it's about is helping these training grounds figure out the future, in this more secular time, and help prepare faith leaders who can operate effectively and faithfully in that context. And Lily's help is really important and welcome.
I have a long history with Lilly that goes back to 2000. When I was the dean of the chapel at Georgetown College, we were one of 88 schools that received a $2 million grant and then a $500,000 addition in a program that I administered. This got me connected to the Lilly Endowment on a very personal way. And then I'll tell you this story because at the end of that grant, 2008, I went up to the endowment and met with the then vice president and the program director of the religion division, Chris Goebel, who is now the vice president of religion, and asked them to fund the Meetinghouse. But here's what happened. In the small talk leading up to my proposal, which I never got to, we got to talking about other things, including preaching and how ministerial students, there was a steep decline in the interest of preaching among ministerial students. And I had some ideas about what to do about it. They got so interested in this, they said, well, we want to give you some money and let you address this. And rather than
I think I know where you're going with this.
yes. So they gave me all this money, millions of dollars. And so for the next 10 years, I worked in this, the Academy of Preachers, which was an organization that I envisioned and designed and launched and led for almost a decade. But, and as
So
soon as
I want to make sure that you and your listeners know that Yale Divinity School is not being shut out. So YDS is using a Lilly grant, different grant programs, same general idea to help churches find dynamic new approaches to congregational life and community engagement in this changed context that we live in. And so that's something that we're working on at YDS with Lily's help. And as part of this other bigger project that's really fascinating to me, and that's sort of redefining what ministry, quote unquote, ministry looks like and how it operates in the future and how it can operate outside of church walls.
Tom, one of the most interesting things that I became aware of in my work with Lily is the large numbers of seminary students who do not want to go into church work. They want to go into nonprofit work. They want to start their own nonprofit work. And in some ways, this parallels the attitude of lay people who are leaving the congregation by the millions, researchers tell us, but they're finding meaning and service and operation and sacrificial work in other organizations, in other institutions, in other ways.
And is that not ministry?
It is ministry. It is ministry. We don't know how this is going to shake up the church and shake up Christianity in the long haul, but it's going to be interesting to watch. It's one of the most powerful dynamics touching on at least the Christian community in America.
Well, I have a somewhat hopeful and optimistic take. I mean, it's clear that the institutional church is going through some huge challenges and that it is declining and the future looks very cloudy. But I'm confident that in some shape or form, the values of Jesus are going to go forward in this culture in the future. We just don't know what exactly it's going to look like institutionally and operationally.
You know, I agree with you. And I will say that my work with the Academy of Preachers, in which we worked with young people 14 to 28 primarily, from Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, Evangelical, Pentecostal traditions, gave me enormous hope for the institutional church.
Oh, yeah?
These are talented, dynamic, thoughtful, intelligent, committed young people all across the board, liberal, conservative, black, white, male, females, gay and straight, and that are pouring into the church and are leaders now all over the country. And this gives me hope for the institutional church, even though it's going through the dramatic changes like you are describing right now.
Right.
But we'll have to watch all of that, and we'll report on round 3 of this particular Pathways Lilly grant when they release, I think next June, late June, when they release these bigger grants. We'll see who is involved in that. My last story today is really 2 large global festivals that are going on. Christians launched the Advent season this past Sunday with the lighting of the Candle of Hope. I was not in my church, which we have a picture of here. Our preacher sitting there in the pulpit chair with all of our decorations including the Advent candles. They lit the candle of hope. I watched it on the live stream. This 4-week period in the Christian calendar anticipates the birth of Jesus and the 14-day Christmas season, which begins on December the 24th. That was this past Sunday, the first Sunday of Advent. On Monday, Jews around the world began their annual Hanukkah celebration, also with the lighting of candles. This festival remembers the successful uprising of Jews led by the Maccabee brothers in the 2nd century BCE, that is before the Common Era. And they were revolting against the Greek rulers of Judea and Jerusalem and seeking to establish their own freedom. It's known as the Festival of Lights and ends next Monday, December the 6th. You know, as I was writing this summary, Tom, I had to confess to myself that I've never been to a Hanukkah service. Have you?
No, I haven't been.
I rebuked myself for this. I'm 71 years old. I have lived in Jewish cultures. I have taught about Judaism, including the Festival of Lights. So here I am reporting on it again. I've never been to a Hanukkah service.
All right. Well, you have plenty of years left, not as many as you used to have, but there's time. There's time to address that situation. Well, when I saw that you were going to include this as your 6th story, I was tempted to say Merry Christmas to you, but is it too soon? It's only December 2nd. Like, when is the cutoff?
Well,
when you can start saying Merry Christmas to your Christian friends.
There's a sense in which Merry Christmas is appropriate any time of year. And now with people putting up their decorations around right after Halloween, it's hard to postpone it. And in a church like ours that follows the lectionary, there is a kind of a rule that you don't sing the Christmas songs until after Advent. You sing Advent songs.
All right.
And you don't sing songs about the birth of Jesus and joy to the world and O Little Town of Bethlehem and Away in a Manger. You don't sing those until Christmas Eve. Well, I frankly don't like that. The Christmas songs are such great songs. We know them by heart. I want to sing them more than just for 2 weeks. I don't know whether
All right. Well, you're dodging my question. You said that it's never inappropriate to say Merry Christmas, but I mean, you would think it was weird if I said it to you in July. And so we need a firm pastoral decision right now from somebody with your theological knowledge and training.
No,
you have to draw the line. When is it okay to say Merry Christmas to your Christian friends?
You can do it all through the month of December.
Okay. So that's the cutoff, December.
Yeah.
All right.
But I will say this, many churches have now a campaign in July called Christmas in July. And they raise money and gather goods in July for especially their overseas ministries.
Mm-hmm.
So they can provide goods and gifts and have time for them to be collected and be transported and be presented by the actual Christmas. So there is a tradition of Christmas in July already in many Christmas churches and many Christian churches. And I don't know, maybe they say Merry Christmas in July. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe one.
All right. Why buy that? And then here's the other thing you got me wondering about, if I can ask you another question.
Sure.
Do you think the war on Christmas thing is going to flare up again? Is that starting to die out? I mean, you and I would agree that the war on Christmas is not a real thing. It's kind of trumped up to get people agitated and to provide grist for the mills of the culture war. I'd like to think that it's becoming passé and that people aren't really grinding away at that axe anymore, but I don't know.
I think, first of all, it's stupid. And
yes,
it is wrong. And third, it is just a gimmick to try to gin up some conservative Christian activity. I hope it doesn't come up. I ignore it all the time, anytime I hear it or see it. And I just discount it.
Well, ignoring it, that would be better. I mean, sometimes I notice it and I still get upset by it, but it doesn't deserve that kind of serious attention, and it doesn't deserve my, space in my limited amount of like thought time, space for angry, upset. It's nonsense. So you're motivating me to say that I'm just going to be above that. I'm not going to react to it.
Sure. I do want to conclude our conversation today. I want to thank you for being with me again in the Meeting House for this lively conversation about these 6 interesting stories. But I have a little video about Hanukkah that I want to show before the end of the show today. So I want to say goodbye to you, Tom, and I want to welcome everybody to watch this little video. It's about 3 minutes. It's a wonderful and inspirational video about the meaning of Hanukkah. Let's roll it.
Have you ever experienced a miracle? I'm talking about the kind of earth-shattering miracles of the Bible, where God bends the rules of nature and the sun stands still. A staff turns into a snake, or a donkey starts talking. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever heard from a prophet, someone who actually talks to God? There was a time in our history when miracles happened and prophets walked among us. The entire Bible takes this as a given. But at some point, that all stopped. The rules of the game changed. God stopped talking to us, and there were no more miracles. It was in this new age of divine silence that the Hanukkah story took place. When the Greeks invaded Israel, it was a time of uncertainty. We had no way of knowing if God was with us anymore. The Greeks banned Torah study and Jewish practice. They placed idols in our holy temple. It seemed as though God had turned his back on us. We were left to face a spiritual crisis all on our own, and we were groping in the dark. But the Maccabees decided to stand up for their beliefs. They rebelled against the Greeks, and something very strange started to happen. They began to win, defeating armies many times their size. Their victory was great, to be sure, but God was still silent. Had God helped them achieve their victory, or was it just a fluke? Did God care about their trivial battle? Was their victory meaningful to him? Despite their uncertainty, the Maccabees were determined to rekindle the Jewish people's relationship with God. They rededicated the temple and lit the menorah with just a small bit of oil, certain that it would go out by tomorrow. But when they came back the next day, they saw that it was still burning. And this happened again and again. For 8 straight days, the light would not go out. It was a miracle from God. The impact of this miracle might seem trivial. It didn't save us from our enemies or cause us to win the war. But its message wasn't trivial at all. After all that we'd been through, this miracle showed us that we weren't alone. God broke his own rules and reached across the silence to show us that he was still with us. That message is certainly worth celebrating, and it's a message that we desperately need to hear. Because the age of darkness didn't go away, it continues in our day. We don't see prophets or open miracles around us. We don't have a direct line to God. But we have the lights of Hanukkah, the miracle that reminds us that even if God is silent, he is still here with us. This Hanukkah, as we light candles in our homes, surrounded by our family and our loved ones, can we catch a glimpse of the hidden miracles in our lives? Can we see a bit of light that continues to shine longer and brighter than we thought it would? Lighting the Hanukkah candles is our way of connecting to those miracles, of remembering that we're not alone, that even in the darkness, there is always a little bit of light that's still shining.
Thank you for joining us in the Meeting House today. Go to the website to read the commentary that I didn't have time to read at themeetinghouse.net. Join us next week. here in the Meeting House for another conversation on religion and American life. I'm Dwight A. Moody. Have a great day.
You have been in the Meeting House with host Dwight A. Moody. Thank you for watching or listening today. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net for more news, reviews,